August 28th, 2025. Braking mechanisms beneath the bus squealed in complaint as it rolled to a stop on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Carefully shuffling down the walkway between seats alongside other passengers, I stepped out onto the sidewalk and peered about to get my bearings. The air here carried a different scent than Fargo's, a mixture of exhaust and damp pavement with subtle aromas of human food being prepared somewhere unseen. Surrounded by the city's rhythmic pulse, alive with the hum of vehicles, the chatter of pedestrians, and on occasion the distant wail of sirens, I was almost overwhelmed by it all. Veering off the crowded sidewalk and into a more secluded alleyway, my gaze instinctively flickered upwards in search of an ideal vantage point. One nearby building appeared somewhat taller than the rest, instantly drawing me to its brick side wall as I glanced about to ensure nobody was watching, before stretching out my left arm into a tendril and wrapping it securely around a rusty pipe to pull myself up by. The metal groaned under my weight, yet nevertheless held firm as I scaled the structure's side with ease, reaching up with a second tendril to grip the rooftop's edge before hoisting myself over it and onto the rooftop with a final burst of mild effort, retracting my biomass into its human shape before approaching its far edge to get a better look at the city below. From this height, Minneapolis stretched out before me as a vast expanse of glass and steel. Roads stretched like veins between the towering structures, pulsing with vehicles whose lights flickered in the darkness of dawn. Distantly, a long, segmented vehicle I did not recognize rumbled along a predetermined track, its voice blaring out between the buildings loud enough to startle me. The sheer density of human activity here dwarfed anything I had experienced back in Fargo. Gazing out over the city streets, it was clear that I needed a plan. Producing the map from my pocket and looking over the cities listed upon it, I determined my next destination to be a place called Rochester. From there I would make my way to Madison. However, checking my other pocket, it was rather clear that I would not have sufficient currency for another bus ride. Somehow, I had to either obtain more money or find an alternative vector by which to travel. Before doing anything else, though, my first order of business within Minneapolis was to begin cultivating more biomass. Fortunately, sewer systems were apparently not unique to Fargo, and upon climbing down from my vantage point, I discovered a lid similar to those I'd found back then. Wrapping a tendril around this alleyway, covering and easing it open just enough to slip some biomass in underneath, I dropped a small fragment of myself inside and mentally commanded it to remain hidden as it began cultivating more cells. "Hey, you!" The sound of a human shout echoed through the alleyway as I turned my gaze to find an officer staring me down. In my rush to canvass the city layout, I'd apparently grown careless and failed to detect them. "What's going on over there?" "Nothing, officer," I replied, carefully gauging this one's body language for any signs of hostility with each step closer they took. Just how much of my act did this enforcer see? Keeping my distance from the officer, I stepped back from the sewer lid and allowed him to take a look. "How in the hell?" he murmured, kneeling down to investigate the damaged cover before looking back up at me with confusion. "Did you do this?" Given my prior experience with human law enforcement, I saw no inherent reason to lie on this topic. "I needed to access the sewers for a moment, that's all." Confusion flickered momentarily across the officer's face as his hand hesitated before a dent in the lid. "I hope you're aware, son, it's a crime to open one of these without prior authorization. I'm going to need you to come down to the station with me." Panic lanced through every cell in my body upon the officer's revelation. I did not know what would be done to me at this station, but if there was any chance they might discover who or what I was, this was very much not an appreciable turn of events. "Are you sure that's necessary?" I asked, attempting to conceal the nervousness growing within me. "Necessary enough that I'll cuff you if you don't comply," nodded the officer, grabbing me somewhat harshly by the arm and turning around to bring us out of the alleyway. Craning my neck to ensure nobody was behind us, I subtly sharpened my free arm into a spike of false bone, preparing to ram it into his throat. In no more than an instant I could end this human and disappear back into the alleyway. Before I could complete the action, however, I was reminded of the kindness shown to me by his fellow policemen back in Fargo. This officer was not a threat to me, and they were merely performing their intended function. And if I did eliminate this protective cell, it would more than likely trigger an immune response from the greater body of Minneapolis. As such, I determined that killing him would not be an ideal course of action. Surely I could find some way to slip away without their noticing. Graciously allowing the officer to stuff me into the back seat of his car, I surveyed the vehicle for any weak points I could later take advantage of. The metal mesh separating me from the front seat would do little in the way of hindering my amorphous movement, and if push came to shove, I possessed more than enough strength to simply the door off. "Now, what exactly were you trying to get into the sewer for?" asked the officer as he hopped into the front seat and activated his vehicle's engine before pulling off the steeply slanted side of the sidewalk and merging into the lane where other vehicles zipped past. This was not a question I could afford to answer honestly, even if I left out anything directly tied to my nature. Suggesting that I had left something in the sewer would undoubtedly encourage further investigation into the matter, something I obviously did not want to facilitate. "I, dropped something down there and wanted to go get it," I lied. "Well, whatever it is you dropped down there, you're going to want a new one," replied the officer, his words suggesting that he believed my story despite the incredulity of his expression in the mirror above. "Mind telling me how you got that lid off?" Yet another excellent question. No human could have ripped that cover open on their own, and I very clearly lacked any tools that would assist me in doing so. It was already partially open when I arrived. Took me a little while to lift, though. Again, the enforcer regarded my claim with skepticism, stopping before a glowing red light to leer back at me. The longer we spoke for, the less likely it seemed that this conversation would conclude in my favor. With the vehicle not in motion, it was an ideal chance for me to either fight or flee. Before I could make such a pivotal decision, however, the vehicle's dashboard crackled to life. "All units, we have reports of an active shooting in progress at the Mall of America. Multiple suspects armed," began the voice that came on over it before garbling out a series of nonsensical words that I presumed to be some form of address. "Shots fired near the north entrance. Additional gunmen reported inside. Eyewitness reports confirm at least 6 gunmen. SWAT is en route." Suddenly, the officer's expression of vague suspicion gave way to intense focus. "Shit," he murmured, reaching toward his dashboard and with the flick of a switch activating a cacophony of light and sound from atop his vehicle. Weaving between traffic, I saw other cars swerving aside to clear the path, some nearly colliding with each other as we sped past. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, 1 responding. ETA is 5 minutes. Putting together the pieces, my best guess as to the situation was an extreme immune response by the Minneapolis body. For something to trigger this kind of urgency, it seemed likely that there was immense risk of damage involved. Beneath us, tires screeched against the black stone street as the officer peeled into this place's parking lot. The structure looming over us was significantly larger than those around it, with white letters upon its concrete face set beneath a multicolored star. Coming to a stop directly in front of the entrance, the man in front of me removed the weapon from his holster and briefly disconnected an internal piece of it before slapping it back in. "Dispatch, this is Officer Bissell. I am on scene." Also near the front building's doors were 2 other vehicles of a similar make to his own. Taking a closer look into these cars, I saw a total of 3 other immune agents in blue between them. "All units currently on scene. Breach the perimeter and evacuate any civilians you can. Be advised, assailants are armed and dangerous," blared the dashboard voice, their tones saturated in urgency. "You stay here!" Bissell barked at me, kicking open his vehicle's driver's side door and stepping out to join the other officers as they prepared to enter the building. Pulling my attention from the officer and producing my phone, I connected to the mall's Wi-Fi and began to sift through social media and near immediately landed upon one particular video. The grainy footage trembled in the hands of whoever had been recording it. A human, female by the looks of them, held back whimpers as loud echoing cracks filled the air. The feed jolted violently, a blur of fluorescent lights, overturned objects, and scattered movement. The sound of something striking flesh. Screams. The nearby sound of glass shattering brought my attention back to the nearby officers as one of them fell over, their blue uniforms slowly staining red. Immediately, 2 of the other immune cells grabbed their injured comrade and attempted to drag them away from the entrance, leaving only Bissell. Then came a scream, sharp, panicked, and too close to ignore. Bissell turned his head toward the shattered glass doors, jaw tightening. He glanced back at his wounded comrade, then at the entrance. Raising his weapon, the officer sprinted inside. Such an action was clearly foolish. This immune cell lacked the necessary equipment to successfully fight this infection. Yet for the sake of assisting his fellow humans, the officer rushed into danger and almost certain death. More than likely, however, he would fail, and more humans would die as a result. With no human eyes focused upon me, I decided that moment to be the ideal time for an escape. Grabbing the door handle beside me and forcing it open with a burst of moderate effort, I stepped out into the light of day. The decision to escape this scene should have been an obvious one. Surely the immune system would eventually get this under control, and I did not wish to risk discovery by intervening. However, scrolling through the posts from inside, I soon came upon one with no indicated time. In the top corner of the video window was a red dot accompanied by the single word live. Depicted in this video, I saw that same woman from before. Her voice quivered and shook as she spoke, listing out words indicative of her relatives. "If this is goodbye, I love you all," she almost wailed. I watched the screen, frozen, the fear in this human's eyes, the resignation in her voice. It stirred something within me. Not pity nor guilt, but rather something deeper. The image of the soft one, of Jane Stern, flashed unbidden in my mind. The way she looked at me, not as a mere thing, but as a living creature worth saving. In that moment, my better judgment escaped me as I turned around and stared at the mall. Suddenly, the cruiser's radio once again blared to life as dispatch delivered another message. "All units, be advised. SWAT team en route has been involved in a collision at the intersection." Static overwhelmed the operator's voice as they listed out 2 street names. "We have injuries and the vehicle is disabled. New ETA for backup is 20 minutes. Judging by how they spoke of this SWAT team, they were likely the more specialized immune cells, the sort equipped to deal with this scenario. With them delayed, the odds of more humans dying before their arrival were greatly increased. At that moment, I made a decision. If the immune system could not deal with the problem, then perhaps the addition of an antibiotic was necessary.